Today is a very important day in United States history. It's September 11th. Now, I usually don't talk about the day in which we record an episode, but I feel like I have to. It means so many things to so many different people. For me, it was a bittersweet day. My daughter was actually born. And what's crazy is we had just moved back to the Bay Area from the East Coast, and I had actually worked quite a bit in the World Financial Center, which was just across the street. I have a lot of friends that were working there. So to say that it was a bittersweet day, I'm understating it. I mean, my daughter was born, but I was also worried about my friends who at that point in time, I didn't know if they had survived. But really, when you think about it, today is when we saw the spirit of the United States in its rawest form. It's when we came together as a nation. It's also a day when leaders really revealed themselves, firefighters, policemen, and everyday people who did heroic things. Sometimes people with very different ideologies, but people who came together to do the right thing. And, you know, at its core, the Resilient Podcast is all about meeting with leaders who've been knocked on their butt only to come back stronger. They have a certain drive and a focus that will not let them fail. And today's story is about a woman who embodies grit, determination, and a relentless need to lead. And this was born in her or embedded in her at such a young age. Today we are joined by Shellye Archambeau, former CEO at MetricStream and board member at Verizon and Nordstrom. She was in the thick of crisis response and recovery at MetricStream, and she has been a leader in thinking about risk management and the relation to senior executives. And quite frankly, I think this is one of the most important issues. In my experience, oftentimes senior executives have a very different position or way that they think about risk than traditional risk managers. And in order for risk management to be effective, they need to better elevate what they do and put it into the context of what matters most to CEOs.
So imagine coming home and telling your husband, hey, babe, I'm not going to pay myself for probably a year. So I have a fantastically supportive husband, and other members of the team took pay cuts, did all of that as we tried to figure out how we make this happen. But here's what happened. 2009, we're living on fumes, literally fumes. But we grew 50%.
Welcome to the Resilient Podcast, where we hear stories from leaders on risk, crisis, and disruption. My name is Mike Kearney. I lead Deloitte's Brand and Reputation Venture Fund and Spark Experiences. I deliver services to clients. And then, in addition to all my jobs, I have this little hobby on the side where I have this awesome opportunity to sit down with incredible leaders who define what it is to be resilient. I'm sitting down with Shellye in Mountain View, California, which is fantastic because for once, I didn't actually have to get on a plane. And I can't wait to talk to Shellye about what it's like to be a CEO of a GRC company, and how did she think about risk? I think there's a huge opportunity to enhance how risk management professionals bring risk to the C-suite. Also going to talk to her about her experiences on boards. She's on Nordstrom and Verizon. And then also, as I typically do, I'm going to ask her a bunch of questions on leadership. What are her perspectives on what it's like to lead? What's her ideas on work-life balance? I don't think she likes it very much based on my research. So without further ado, let's get to it. My conversation with Shellye. Shellye, welcome to Resilient.
Thank you. Great to be here.
It is awesome. I do a lot of research in advance of these interviews, and one of the things I've found is you're a pretty prolific writer. But I want to start off with a personal story of resilience. It sounded like after 4th of July, you were involved in a pretty bad car accident. And one of the things that you talked about was the importance of key relationships. I think you even called it a village in recovery. And I'm curious, when you think about that personal story, how that impacted your perspective on resilience and the importance of relationships and bouncing back from something like that.
Yeah, I actually feel that a village, those relationships that make up the village, are critical for resilience, which is why I took the time to actually write about it, because this accident was pretty bad, and it happened over 80 miles from home.
Oh, wow.
So suddenly I'm in this medical center, 80 miles from home. My husband, who was driving, fortunately did not get injured at all, which was great. I'm in the ICU. but he happens to be undergoing radiation treatment because he unfortunately
Separate,
has cancer.
obviously, from
Separate,
you.
right?
Yep.
And that's up in Palo Alto.
Oh, geez.
So my kids are remote. One's in Florida, one's in New York. They fly in to help. But trust me, trying to manage that, and oh, by the way, my nephew was also hurt and he was with us, so we're there. So they're trying to manage everything in the distance, and it's crazy. And I frankly am not very comfortable with this medical center, so I want to get to Stanford. But I'll tell you, between egos and red tape, it's not happening.
Just making that trip, probably 75 miles, it wasn't going to happen.
I'm telling you, it
Wow.
wasn't happening. And I said, fine. So I told my daughter, I said, Kathleen, call my network. I said, you call my C200 sisters, and I gave her like 5 names to call. And in, I guess, 2 days later, I was at Stanford. That
Wow.
would not have happened without my network and the relationships, and then people reaching out to try to make the connections and get this thing going.
So do you think you could draw parallels from your personal story, do you think, to resilience in a corporate setting? Meaning, do you think it's important in times of a crisis and in being resilient to have kind of a network of relationships as well?
Absolutely. Absolutely. This one happened to be personal. But even throughout business, as we ran into challenges or issues, you wanted to have people that you could go to and reach out to for help, advice, intros, open doors, support, whatever it might be. As a matter of fact, when I actually became a CEO for the first time, I created my own little network because it was the first time I didn't have any peers. And I didn't realize what it was like actually not to have a peer, where suddenly everybody's working for you or you're working for them. And you can't treat the people that are working for you differently. So I said, ooh, this isn't going to work. I need some peers. So I literally went out and put together a group of other women who were building companies, similar, all tech industry, et cetera. And literally, we became each other's peers. And
Does that
group,
network still exist today?
It does. It actually evolved into my C200 group.
I was going to ask you, so what is C200? Yeah.
So C200 is the Committee of 200. It was actually founded back in, I want to say, the 70s.
Okay.
When there weren't women running businesses.
Right.
So it's for women who actually run businesses at scale. And we took our little informal group and basically moved it all. We all became members of C200 several years ago. So that, yes, it still exists into this broader network.
Did you feel that, and I'm asking this from a personal perspective, I've been putting together this small little group. We call it, and if Ron and Jeff are listening, we call it the CEO Clown Council. And here's why we call it that. One was a president at Chevron, the CEO, and the clown literally was a clown from Cirque du Soleil. So we're being a little facetious with it.
Oh, that's
but
fun.
One of the things that we talk about is maintaining a certain level of authenticity. Do you know when you get together and you're doing it for the right reasons versus sometimes when you're part of a bigger group that is maybe more bureaucratic or there's more rules or people are doing it for a reason? Did you find that going from that small intimate group to the broader group had any drawbacks?
Well, actually, we were able to keep the best of both worlds.
Interesting.
In that it is it's actually an international organization, but probably 90% of the members are in the U.S., but we also have this notion of councils and local councils. So we have a local Silicon Valley council.
So you can almost create
So it's
that
small,
intimate.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So that's a small, intimate group that has a regular meeting separate. But we just happen to also be part of the broader
Got
group
it.
and organization.
Got it.
So it works out very well.
So you became a CEO and you said, listen, I need a group of peers. And so you created this. And was that the first time, because one of the things I think I read, and this probably was before, is where you really recognize the importance of relationships. I think one of the things that you had said is, I forget, I've read a lot now on here, but I think you had said, when I was younger, I was hard charging and I didn't really recognize the importance of relationships. Maybe if you could just share a bit about that, about how you figured out relationships really do matter and how that morphed into this group.
Yeah, it didn't kick off with me until, oh my goodness, I was with IBM and I was working in Harrisburg. So I was probably already
Harrisburg, Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania. That's
Yeah.
right. IBM, I've been moved. I've been all over the place.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I'd been with the company for maybe 6 or 7 years. And IBM was putting in place this new mentoring program for their high potentials. So great. I was nominated and IBM gave me the choice. They said, well, who would you like to be your mentor? Which I thought was pretty interesting. So I picked a gentleman named Roland Harris, who I happened to know.
Right.
He was a couple levels up from me. And 2 days later, I get a phone call from Roland Harris. Shellye. And I said, hi, Roland. He said, Shellye. And I'm like, oh, he's not happy. He said, you put my name down to be your mentor. And I said, yeah, Roland, I thought you actually liked me and took an interest in, like, what did I do wrong?
Like, isn't this an honor?
Exactly. I'm like, what did I do wrong here? And he said, Shellye, you got me. Go get somebody else. And it wasn't until that time that I realized the importance of, oh, okay, so I'm actually supposed to have a broader set of relationships, right? Versus take the ones I have and drive them deep. But his was really the first click in terms of doing that.
Like, this is an activity I need to engage in, and I need to work this.
Absolutely. So then I did, but I'll be candid. I spent 15 years at IBM. And it wasn't until I left IBM and got to Blockbuster, and I was sitting on a plane with the chief marketing officer. I was the president of Blockbuster.com. And he said to me, he goes, Shellye, who do you use to bounce ideas off and, get some outside thinking, et cetera? And so I named a couple people in Blockbuster. And he said, no, I mean outside of Blockbuster. And I said, oh, again, it's kind of this light bulb. I didn't realize I was supposed to have people outside of Blockbuster. IBM was so big, right? 200,000+ people.
Yep.
And you moved around so much that you had a very big network, but frankly, it was all IBMers.
Right.
And it never occurred to me to build it outside. So it wasn't until I actually got to Blockbuster.com that whole notion of, oh no, it needs to be broader in terms of the world. It's like, I got it. I'm a pretty good listener. I may be late to learning things, but I do listen.
But it's fascinating because I think now we have, I'm going to probably misstate the number, but 250,000 people at Deloitte. And one of the things that I personally find is my best ideas come from the people that I have developed relationships with outside of the firm. And it's not necessarily that there's not a lot of bright people. There are. But I find, like, even like I was saying, the clown, I'm saying that facetious. I can't tell you how many ideas, bringing stuff from the performing arts world into business and how it's actually helped me, and then just going out to different areas. And so I love your idea of it's not necessarily just cultivating relationships in the organization. It's actually going and figuring out your cohort outside of the organization.
Absolutely. And it's really the same notion of diversity.
Right.
People think of diversity, and today it's very focused on culture, ethnicity, et cetera. But frankly, the reason you want networks beyond your own company is you want that diversity of thought. Everybody in the company is reading the same strategy, following the same playbook, so they're going to be limited in terms of how they're thinking about things. Not that they're limited, it's just the context in which they're in.
Yep.
You change the context, like your clown,
Yep.
and you get new and different ideas. So
All
it's
the
really,
time.
Exactly. So it's very, very straightforward.
So, I was driving here, and this is not even something I was thinking I was going to talk about today, but today's 9/11. And it's almost, I just need to mention it because my daughter was born on the 9/11. So she's 17 years old today.
Okay.
And so we had just moved back. I was on the East Coast. I actually worked in our World Financial Center office, which is just right across the street from the towers. I was there in Connecticut. And so I had a lot of friends. There were, I think, 5,000 Deloitte people. And so the day's actually obviously special to me. But then obviously, I know a lot of people that were impacted by it. But I think one of the things that Resilient is about leadership. And one of the things I think I saw on that day, I think the country saw, was leaders rising to the occasion, whether they were in government or whether or not they were in public service, private sector, fire. Were there any lessons in leadership that you drew out of that day, or that you can reflect back on?
Sure. Probably one of the big ones was managing the panic. Right? Managing the panic. Because there were so many unknowns. Everybody's finding out what's happening all at the same time. And it isn't a matter of a situation that you could have planned for. You had a nice risk management issue.
Right.
None of that existed. So, managing through a crisis
Where were you
was
that
the
day?
big thing. I was actually I was out here in California.
Okay.
But my family was living in Dallas, Texas.
Okay.
I had started working out here, but I was commuting. And literally, I'm in the gym on the elliptical. And
6:45 in the morning,
exactly,
probably.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
So I'm looking I'm not listening to the TV, but I have the TV on, and I'm watching this plane hits. I'm like, is this a movie? What am I? Because I wasn't really watching. I was like, what's going on here? And then I look around. There's only 2 other people in the gym. And I look around, and I'm like, did anybody else see that? Did I just see something?
Right.
And I'm I don't have any headphones. I'm like, I can't listen to what's going. But then finally it comes across the screen. And I thought, OMG, I can't believe this. the next thing I'm thinking is my parents were actually supposed to be on a plane coming to Texas to visit my family.
Oh, wow.
And I don't know where they are, right? And what's happening. So anyway, needless to say, I got off the elliptical and I was done with my workout.
Right.
As it's quick, you get on the phones and try to figure out what's going on. And sure enough, my parents were actually on the runway when all this went down. Because they live in New Jersey.
Okay. Oh, so they
were actually,
Newark.
yes, they were actually at the airport. Yeah, so that was crazy. And then I ended up getting stuck out in California.
Probably for a good week, right?
Because they canceled all the flights.
Yep.
But anyway, yeah.
So managing through the panic.
Yes.
That's interesting. Well, we're going to come back to crisis, so we'll carry that theme through. Since you mentioned your parents, give us a little background on who you are, where you grew up, anything that happened when you were a young kid that instilled the values you have. You're obviously a very hard worker. You've been unbelievably successful, broken through a lot of barriers. Maybe if you could just share a bit about your background. Your
Sure.
upbringing.
So I am the eldest of 4 children. My parents were crazy. They had 4 children in less than 5 years.
That is crazy.
That is crazy. Yeah. So my brother, who's the baby, is less than 5 years younger than me. And therefore, we grew up in a very competitive environment.
Yep.
And one in which my parents were all about education, so that you can go get the job and be able to get what you want out of life.
Where did you grow up? What?
Actually, all over.
Okay.
My father worked for IBM. So 7 states before I was in high school. Wow. So I tell people I'm just a nomad, and then I managed to continue that on in terms of myself. But what really drove me was a couple things. One was a really very simple story. I'm still to this day cold-blooded, meaning my hands and my feet get cold easily.
Oh, I was like, sitting across from you and you're cold-blooded?
No, not murder. Not talking about murder here, but literally cold.
Yeah.
So my parents were super thrifty because they're trying to raise and educate 4 kids.
4 kids.
And the temperature in the house never went above 68. Never. So literally, I would drink hot water in the house. I'd wear gloves at times in the house. It was terrible. And I finally said, how much money do I need to make to keep the thermostat at 72? That's all I want to know. How much money do I need to make?
4 degrees. Come on.
4 degrees.
How much does it cost for 4 degrees?
Exactly. So anyway, but it was interesting. But that was literally one of those little things in terms of just being able to control your own environment. My objective in life was I wanted to be able to achieve what I wanted.
Yeah.
And I didn't feel that the odds were actually in my favor to do that.
And why is that?
Well, frankly, growing up, and you have to understand when I grew up, I was born in the early 60s. So I grew up in the 60s and 70s, which was a terrible time in the U.S., actually, for African Americans. Right. And so I went through a lot of bullying and abuse and all kinds of stuff, mainly because my parents believed in education. So we always lived in the absolute best school district that they could possibly afford.
But didn't necessarily have the same means
that others did. There was no diversity.
Yeah.
Nope, no diversity.
Yep.
So I took a brunt of that. And so that just told me that if I just did what everybody else did, if I looked up, there weren't people who looked like me doing the kinds of things that I thought I wanted to do, I wasn't going to get it. So I had to figure out how to improve my odds for success. And that's those two things.
Is there any, like when you say improve my odds for success, we get a lot of kids that are in college listening to this podcast. Is there maybe 1 or 2 things you would suggest to them? Somebody that maybe where the odds are stacked against them. It sounds like you had a lot of grit. Mm-hmm. Is there anything that you can remember that you cultivated as maybe a habit or something that you did?
Yeah, so there were a couple things. One was I really became a big planner. It was like, all right, if I want to do this, what has to be true for me to do it? And then how do I make that true?
And how far out would you look?
It all depends. Well, I can tell you some. All right, I'll share some crazy stories. So first of all, I'm one of those very weird people, but I decided, thanks to a guidance counselor in high school, that I wanted to run a company. So
and who was it?
How did that happen?
So the counselor. So you don't live in a diverse area.
Nope.
So it's obviously a counselor that's probably taken a liking to you, right?
Yeah. Well, actually, it was actually quite simple, and I got lucky. Happened to be a female guidance counselor, and frankly, I think that makes a difference.
Yep.
And she said to me, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "I'm not sure, but I want to make sure that I am able to be independent." And she said, "Well, what do you like to do?" And I said, "Well, I love clubs. I was American Field Service, National Honor Society, French Club,
Yep.
and not only was I in them, but I always ended up running them.
Right.
So I said, I like that. And she goes, oh, running a business is just like running clubs. Lining people to the same objective, figuring out a strategy, going and executing and making it happen. I'm like, oh, done. That's what I'm going to do. And it was literally
How awesome.
that
You know what I
quickly.
love about, so I've got a 17-year-old daughter today and an 18-year-old son. And it's interesting to me because I think it's sometimes hit or miss with those counselors. If they could just say one thing that opens up their mind, and I actually wrote a LinkedIn article about it. One of the things that always concerns me, especially nowadays, is counselors have not the ability, they oftentimes direct them to things that is not necessarily aligned with what their deeper purpose or their deeper why is. But the fact that this individual is able to help you see an opportunity in the future to give you that North Star that you could then begin to plan to is awesome.
Absolutely true. I was so very fortunate. So
then you had
There's
like your
nothing wrong.
20-year plan?
So then, well, not quite 20, but to me, all that meant was, okay, fine. How do we prove my odds for success? That means I need to go to a college that is going to give me credentials. So I said I need to go to the top business school, and the top business school was Wharton.
Yep.
They had an undergraduate program. So if I did that, remember, I didn't come from a ton of means, I wouldn't have to go to grad school.
Yep.
So it was the only college I applied to. I said, this is where I want to
You were
go.
all
Please
in.
take me. I was all in. I'm only applying here. And the good news is, because my parents were all about education, I was a very good student. I had great grades. I had great, so
That wasn't the challenge.
that wasn't the challenge.
Yeah.
So I was able, yes, that's where I went. So I went to Wharton, and then at Wharton, it was like, okay, listen to people. They said, pick industries that are growing. Because I didn't care what kind of business it was. And so I said, great. Looked around, and this happens to be the mid-'80s, and I'm like, technology. So I went into tech, which means at Wharton, I also took some computer programming classes, and I took all those things so that I could go into tech. And I decided IBM was the best technology
Big
company
blue.
back
Yeah.
then.
Yep.
So that's where I was going to go, and I was going to go be CEO of IBM.
Okay. So let's get to, and we were talking a bit about this before we even started the podcast, kind of a CEO's view on risk, crisis, and disruption. And the reason why I think this is so important, I'm going to actually start here, and this is what I was noting to you before we started recording, is I actually have a belief, and it's actually almost my passion now, to connect two groups that I think seemingly are disconnected sometimes. And that is the folks that are running the business, the CEO, the COO, maybe not as much as CFO, but people that are running the business are really trying to drive it. And then the individuals that have risk and compliance responsibilities, the CRO, the head of internal audit, whomever it may be. And one of the divides that I see, and this is why I'm so passionate about this, is how do you bring those two worlds together? Because as you said, as an organization, risk is the flip side of growth or opportunity. And it's so very important. They're inextricably linked. What I find oftentimes is that the CEO, we'll just say the CEO or senior executives, are inextricably linked with risk. Why do you think that is?
I think what happens at times is the risk organizations get very focused, and they're very good at managing and understanding the risks and putting them in different categories and figuring out the priority and making sure that operationally they're being managed, et cetera. But they don't focus on how to talk about risk in the context of business.
Yep.
So here I am as the CEO and the direct reports, and we're focused on strategically. We're trying to drive top line growth, maybe expand internationally, right? There's probably 3 or 4 strategic imperatives.
Right.
And unless the risk team comes in and talks about the risks in the context of those strategic imperatives, then it doesn't feel connected. And if it doesn't feel connected, then I'm not going to spend the time.
So your number one recommendation, if you're a risk management professional, is connect your thinking to what's important to the organization. And the beauty about that is it's so easy. I mean, if it's a public company, I could go out and find in 5 minutes what's important to the CEO. And so you're suggesting when you start that risk conversation, embed it in how the organization's thinking about their long-term growth and what their key strategies are.
Exactly right.
Interesting. Okay. Let's go to a story And I think this is fascinating because when we had our pre-call, you mentioned this, and I was like, I didn't know Shellye had been, because I'd done my research in a crisis of some sorts. But you talked about when you were the CEO of Metric Stream, things were going fabulously. I think you were noted by GRC or Gartner as a market leader in GRC. You were looking to expand. You were looking actually to raise capital, and then boom, the financial crisis hits.
Exactly.
Which in some respects, and I can't tell you how many of these interviews, the crisis has been the financial crisis, among others. But maybe if you could just go back to that and give some context as to, first of all, just what was Metric Stream? What is Metric Stream? Where were you in 2008? And then what happened?
Certainly. So Metric Stream is a governance, risk, and compliance company. We sell software that helps companies manage governance, risk, and compliance across their entire enterprise. Now, when we started the company, governance, risk, compliance was not even a term. It wasn't even a segment. So we were very much evangelizing. We were calling it comprehensive compliance and risk. And we're trying to get attention. We're trying to talk to companies. We're trying to get analysts' attention, right? Which you do.
I
as a
remember
startup.
this was like post-Sarbanes.
Exactly.
And I remember this like yesterday.
Indeed. So imagine, after all this evangelizing, getting your first few customers, the whole bit, finally Gartner says, there's a brand new space. It's called governance, risk, and compliance, and Metric Stream is a leader.
We own it. We own the new category, right?
Like,
We're about to,
exactly. I mean, this is Christmas. Finally, our phone is proactively ringing. We're like, great. We put a strategy in place. We are going to we're going to invest in sales and marketing, drive the growth, and then in 2009, we'll raise money on that growth curve.
Yep.
That's the plan. So first half of the year, doubling down. We're getting there. It's going great. And then second half of the year happens. And here we are. So we have to cut costs quickly. We've got to figure out now, what do we do? So we enter 2009 with a reduced team,
right,
with still customers to go serve, very little money because we had spent it with the idea we'll raise on the growth curve.
Yep.
So the executive team, we all got together. And it's like, listen, we have a choice. We can either say, listen, this is going to be too hard and we're done. Or we can say, no, there's a business here and we're going to go make this happen.
Was there still demand for GRC-related software at the time?
There was.
Yeah.
So here's what happened. So we did. We said, fine, we're going to do what we need to do.
Yep.
So imagine coming home and telling your husband, hey, babe, I'm not going to pay myself for probably a year. So I have a fantastically supportive husband. And other members of the team took pay cuts, did all of that as we tried to figure out how we make this happen. But here's what happened.
Yep.
2009, we're living on fumes, literally fumes. But we grew 50%. 50%.
Wow.
There was still demand. Matter of fact, there was more demand.
Wait, you grew revenue top line by 50%, and you had cut staff.
Yeah.
So you're going faster in a very difficult time with less people.
Right. Because we had to sell in order to make payroll. So it wasn't that people suddenly just fell on our door, but we were super incented. So yes, there was demand.
Because there's probably a deeper learning outside of a crisis stage, right? Mm-hmm. Because what I hear you saying is, yes, demand was still there, but we actually probably got more focused on what really matters, selling. We did. And that's why we drove growth.
We did. It was, we were very targeted on, okay, this is a must-win account, period. And then the whole company's on, what do we need to do, right, to go win this account?
Can you drill down on that? So when you said we were targeted, meaning like we weren't trying to be all things to all people, we just needed to win work and we needed to be focused.
Correct.
And I'm wondering, is part of that we oftentimes get involved in a lot of different things that take our energy away, where in our gut we probably know it may not, yield results. Like you probably, I'm putting words in your mouth, but like, we're not going to spend our time doing X, Y, and Z because this is where the best opportunity is.
Yes.
You focused.
We were hyper-focused. We were hyper-focused because literally, I said we were living on fumes.
Right.
We could not meet payroll if we did not sell.
Right.
And install and collect. Right? Full stop. So this was a matter of there was no choice. This is what we have to do to be able to continue going. And I will tell you, probably the biggest win we had that year was a super large international bank that we had absolutely no business winning. We didn't, I just told you, my financials weren't terrific.
Right.
We didn't have a company that size already. Okay, all these things,
All these reasons that
all
it
these
shouldn't-
reasons
yep.
that we should not have won. And as a result of coming out of 2009, we added one element to our culture. Our culture was all about customer focus, teamwork, innovation, and we added never say die. And that became like the mantra
Does it
for
still
Metric
exist
Stream.
to this
Oh yeah,
day?
oh yeah, they
That's
absolutely,
awesome.
absolutely talk about.
I've
Never
never
Say
seen
Die.
that in like somebody's value statement,
know.
so I love that. What gave you the confidence, or maybe it's not even confidence? Why didn't you fold up shop?
We had worked so hard, and it wasn't a matter of being wrong about the opportunity or wrong about what we were creating to solve the problem. There's just this external dynamic that was happening. And that was really the gut check. You just sit around the table with the senior folks, say, okay, we're going forward and we're not going forward, right? What are we doing? The gut check is, this is our right. We worked hard. We created this thing. What do you mean we're just going to walk away from this?
Also,
Yeah,
it
we
sounds
did.
like you
Absolutely.
believed in the market you were creating.
Definitely believed in the market. Felt it was a huge market, and it was really just a matter of time. And what happened is that financial crisis became our black swan. Because everybody, before it was just financial services that cared about risk, insurance, cared about risk, the whole bit. After 2008, all companies started caring about risk. And that's when the market really took off.
It's interesting because in some respects, it's like we are navigating what everybody else is, which is creating the challenge for our organization. But if we could just make it beyond, we could become one of the leaders as a result of all of the regulatory change that's coming down. Anything good? It sounds like a lot actually a lot of good came out of this crisis for Metric Stream.
It did.
And then culture, can you talk about like the impact? It never die was part of your value statements, but maybe talk about how the culture evolved as a result of it.
Sure. What I would say is the confidence that it instilled about we can do whatever we set our minds to go do really significantly increased. And that is super helpful when you're trying to grow.
Day,
when you're trying to grow and build a business.
Were you able to retain that mentality of never die? Meaning like we're going to hyper focus. Once you started to financially get back on your feet, how did you actually maintain kind of that intense hyper focus?
It's interesting. The whole cultural elements that we talked about. One of the things that we tried to do is just reinforce it. When you saw behaviors that reflected it, you actually called it out. Right? Great example of never say die. So you kept it at the top in terms of mindsets.
Yep.
And frankly, people would raise it if they felt it was disappearing or if we weren't seeing it in other teams or it's not happening. It's like, wait a minute, I thought we were all about this. Where are we? So, it's funny, whenever we would bring new hires into the company, I'd take time and explain our values. And then I'd tell everybody, you are now a value ambassador. So if you don't see these values, I need you to raise it up.
Would you ever get people to come to you and say, hey?
You'd be surprised.
Really?
Yep, you'd be surprised.
Because one of the things, never say die, that is almost the antithesis of large organizations with big bureaucracies, right? I would think that would be one of the challenges because never say die is like, I am going to do anything and everything to overcome X, Y, or Z. The larger and more successful organizations become, there are so many things that prevent you from never saying die.
Exactly. And it's right. And that is the yin yang, which is why did people raise it up? They did, because there were times when, wait a minute, how are we doing things over here? Or how are we doing things there? So I'm not saying we're perfect, but absolutely.
But what you are saying though is the value system of the organization starts and ends, maybe not ends, but starts with the CEO. And I think that's important.
I think that's always true. People talk about the importance of the tone at the top. And that's absolutely true.
But I love the fact that people actually came to you because the rhetoric, it's easy to like, oh yeah, these are our values of the organization. What I oftentimes see is the values or how people are living the values don't align with what's on the plaques or the
well,
wall.
all right. So one of the other things that we would do is I'm a big believer in what I call leadership topics. And this was true before I started Metric Stream. I started at Metric Stream rather. And that is, I started every leadership meeting and took, 10, 15, sometimes 20, if it was a key topic, minutes out of an hour and a half session.
Yep.
So big chunk of time.
Right.
And it was a leadership topic. And the leadership topics were all around behavior. Because it's one thing to say, oh, here are 4 points.
Right.
Right? But what does that actually mean in terms of expected behavior? So I would use these leadership topics as ways to actually explain expected behavior. So, oh
Do you
gosh.
remember, I was going to ask, which one do you think resonated the most? Or is there one where you're like, oh my gosh, people are like, this is fantastic?
Well, honestly, it's funny. I did them every other week.
Right.
Let's say there's one. I mean, I did hundreds. People were like, do you ever run out of leadership topics? And I said, no. As long as people are actually operating and executing.
No.
I mean, it may be a little shade off one or shade off the other, but I'm saying, no, there are always things. And then people would come to me with, Shellye, I think this would be a good leadership topic. So what would a leadership topic be? I'll give you an answer, an example. Don't be a mama bear. All right? And don't be a mama bear beans. Do not let your teams come and give you all the problems. And then you solve all the problems.
Right.
That is not your job. Your job is to develop your team so they can solve problems. So they come to you with problems, great. Make sure they're framing them right. Help them understand how to go think about solving the problem, right? Give them some suggestions, but you do not take over ownership of that problem.
Right.
Do not be a mama bear.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
That language resonates with me. It's very evocative. Mama bear.
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to remember mama bear. Would you actually spend time, obviously you spent time thinking about the presentation, but would you actually even think about how you would communicate so that it was sticky? Like, it's
I'd
almost
try.
storytelling, I would almost, yeah.
The answer is I would try.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean I was always as successful, but the answer is I'd absolutely try. Because the point was, I take time
Right.
to talk about this, right? That's a behavior orientation. And then the deal was, listen, now you go and you have your meetings. I'm expecting you guys to talk about this. So the whole idea is it would
Cascade throughout, yeah.
That's what you wanted. So imagine every 2 weeks, right, you're getting topics that are all, here are the 4 points on the wall, but how do we actually expect you to behave? That was trying to drive that to create that culture.
And they're like, Shelley's talking about this, and if she's spending 20 minutes in our meeting, this is obviously important.
Yeah.
But I just go back to one of the things I think there's an opportunity, or where you see great leaders, is where they use great storytelling, like the mama bear. We all get it right away, and you almost don't even need to say anything. It's like, don't be a mama bear.
Right.
You don't need to give the context, beyond that. That's very cool. Okay, so let me ask you. You wrote I love all the writing. You were one of my easier guests because you write so much. So you wrote a LinkedIn post on mitigating risk and seizing opportunities. We talked a bit about this before, but I want to touch on 2 recommendations that caught my attention. First is give risk and compliance professionals a seat at the table. And the second one I think is really interesting is ensure that risk information is communicated to the board in a simple manner. So let's start with the first one. Give risk and compliance professionals a seat at the table. What do you think, beyond what we talked about of putting risk in the context of what's important to the business, what can risk and compliance professionals do to instill confidence with senior executives?
Yeah, it comes back to the point that we were talking about before. You have to speak in the language of business. And if you speak in the language of business, you're going to be more welcome to the table.
What about, I've seen certain executives where they may not want the bad news. Is there any guidance you would give to a risk professional where maybe there is a senior executive and they're trying to break through because, to a certain degree, especially if you're linking it to their strategy or their priorities, the risk, no pun intended, is that you're saying, oh, Mr. Executive, Miss Executive, your strategy may not be on point, or there may be inherent issues with it. How do you overcome something like that if you're a risk professional?
Well, think about it. What is the objective? What is the objective of your executive?
To be successful.
Right. That's the objective.
Yep.
And so as long as you're presenting information within that context, first of all, do not show up in a broad meeting and the first time you're talking about it, share, here's all the risks, right? That's ridiculous. Make sure that you actually have taken time to have the pre-meetings or pre-conversations. And make sure they understand that what you're trying to do is to help them be successful. Risks are not just negative. Risk and opportunity, 2 sides of the same coin. So you can take advantage of risks out there.
Right. And I think
and
that's
leverage
a critical
it.
point, right?
Yeah. And so a risk manager's job is not just to stop all the risk. I mean, if you eliminated risk in business, nobody make any money.
Right.
Because that's how you make money in business. You take risks.
Right.
So your job is not to stop the risk. Your job is to help manage risk, which means mitigate some where the risk is higher than the reward opportunity, and actually elevate some where the opportunity is higher than the risk. Great. Here's where we ought to be doubling down. But if you can talk on both sides, that also creates an impression that you're not just the naysayer of why we shouldn't do everything out there.
I almost look at it as they're almost like the intelligence unit and position it as such. And I actually, one of the words that I oftentimes advise my clients to talk about is, I'm giving you intelligence so that you can have confidence in what you are doing. Because a lack of information means you're kind of winging it sometimes. And if you can give me information on those things that could thwart my success, or things that I can do to overcome that, I'm going to be more confident in the strategies or whatever my priorities are. Okay, so then the second one is ensure that risk information is communicated to the board in a simple manner. So I totally get what you're saying. Like, simplicity is key. Do you have any good practices? Because I think this is a challenge, because oftentimes I think executives believe that they need to have all the data and the information to support it. But the board is inundated. You get those large board packages. So what guidance, and this actually transcends risk, but when people are putting together the board materials, beyond just make it simple, can you drill down on that a bit? And this is probably, you're like, yes, I can.
Yeah. This is one where you can never talk too much about it.
Yeah.
So making it simple. Making it simple is all about how easy is it to digest. So you have to put yourself in the other person's shoes, not your shoes, the other person's shoes, who is not an expert in your area. What do they need to understand to be able to make a better business decision, right? And work back from there. So what's the minimum they need to know?
Right.
And then try to work back from there. You can always have your backup. You can always have an appendix, but create it very simple so they can look at something and understand, okay, I understand that you've done the work, and we may have, I'm going to make it up, we may have 220 risks throughout the overall company that reach a important kind of level. Fine. As a board member, what are the 20 that you want me to focus on, right? Or help me understand where you're focused as a company, and then even ones that aren't the most likely high impact. But sometimes you also want to make sure you highlight the least likely but high impact.
The ones that you're most vulnerable to.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right, need to be viewed. So it's not just don't just give me the top square. Make sure I can see in terms of understand the context with regards to the others, and then give me the context that we're actually managing them. Somebody actually owns it. We actually have plans in place, et cetera, and have those reviewed, but all in business context.
Yeah, gosh, there's so many things to potentially unpack here. One is, I wonder how well most people really understand what the board member's role is. So I think that's the first thing, is to really almost understand, what are they tasked with doing? I also think, and this transcends boards, it's also when you're pushing information up to executives, understand how they like to consume information too. And I think there's actually, breadcrumbs that you can look at. Look at how they communicate, right? Like, executives are communicating all the time. You can almost even begin to emulate the way that they communicate and leverage that. And then I think the other thing that I think is important is distilling it down, maybe an optionality, meaning like, if we have this risk, we'll just play that one out. Here's what it means from a business perspective going back, but here's the implications, and there could be, several things that you highlight. But I think that's important. I think it's oftentimes hard because the people that are ultimately sharing that information with the board have never been in that role before.
And they also know too much. Because they know
That's
too much,
great.
they want to be able to share their knowledge and want to make sure that the board knows that it's thorough and that they thought through it. All of those things are what cause you to put too much out there.
I'm like pausing here because that actually, there's always like a couple little nuggets. I think that is the challenge. I think it's twofold. They know too much, and they want you to know that they know too much. And so as a result of that, I need to tell them everything.
Right.
Okay. I want to pivot. I think you may be the first board member that I've had on Resilient. And so I want to pivot from, your role when you were the CEO of MetricStream to now you're on 2 boards.
Yeah, actually added a third public board just recently, Roper Technologies.
Very cool. Okay. My wife was excited, and my daughter, that you're on Nordstrom. We spend a lot of money there.
Good. I'm glad to hear it.
A little too much. Just teasing. She's like, but I don't even know what this means. This may not mean anything. It's like triple point day or something like that to me. I'm like, well, what does that mean? What do I get out of that? But then also Verizon. So you've got a lot of experience. What is it? So you've been a CEO. You've been on now 3 boards. I think you're also still even on Metric Stream, right? Mm-hmm. So you're, I guess, on 4 boards. What do you think makes a good board member? Because it's very different, right? Going from management to being on the board.
Correct. So a couple things. One, you have to be prepared. So you got to do your work, and it's not just the deck that they send you, but it's making sure that you've got the companies on your Google alerts so you know what's happening, that you pay attention to the context of what's going on in those industries, and you invest the time. So you come prepared. 2 is remember that your job is to look out for the interests of the shareholders. Your job is not an operational job.
Right. That's hard, isn't it? Is it? What is it? I know it's hard for some people.
Yeah, no, it is at times. You have to check yourself. Yep. If you have good chairman or lead directors, they'll make sure the board is checked. Because most people, what also helps make good board members are people who actually have run companies, right? And done operational jobs. So you tend to have this instinct of, let's dig in. So you have to be careful. But remember what your job is. And so therefore, it's all about not telling the company what to do. It's really about asking the questions to make sure that they've just thought through the strategies, the approaches, everything that they're trying to undertake. And they've looked at that in the broad context. So remember that it's the role of the shareholder. Third is your job is to ensure that the company has the right strategy to deliver the expected returns to shareholders, the right people in place to deliver the strategy. Right? That's really what you're focused on.
Right.
So you want to make sure that you actually spend time on the strategy. It's also easy to do things that spend more time on operational versus on strategy.
Are there any things that you do to get smart about the industry? I mean, obviously you're playing across a few different industries. I think my wife would be great on Nordstrom. I'm teasing, but what do you do? Like beyond just reading?
I've actually, for instance, when I joined Verizon, and I'd spent a little bit of time in telecom,
right?
And I went to some industry conferences, right? I started subscribing to some of the blogs, right, that were out there. I just needed to get up to speed on who are the key players, what's happening, all those kinds of things. So yes. You definitely do the work. That's why I said it's all about
curiosity. It seems too,
it is.
Just a genuine level of curiosity that you need to employ. So Shellye, one of the things you've talked about is the importance of managing reputational risks, which right now I run a brand and reputation venture fund, so it's obviously something very important to me. It's also something that I think is fairly nascent. I think you've even talked about that as well. Any thoughts or ideas you have on what organizations can or should do to get better ahead of reputational risks?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's really come to more light with different behavior things, right, that are happening within companies that are really affecting their overall reputations. As boards think about risk and are working with the teams, they need to spend more time looking at things that affect reputation that aren't necessarily what you would normally see in your risk profile.
Absolutely.
So things like culture. Things like sometimes you have assets where, frankly, the risk of those assets outweighs the opportunity, business value, right, when you think about it in terms of if a reputational issue happened. The other area to think about it is also when you do mergers and acquisitions. That always opens up a lot of potential reputational risks because you are suddenly inheriting everything that company has done or transpired and or weaknesses they have, whatever, that could also show up from a reputational standpoint.
Yeah, one of the things that I've found when talking to clients about this, they oftentimes think about it as an outcome, like a reputational incident, and that many of the ways in which you manage reputation are through other programs. And one of the things that I think we see value in is exactly what you started to talk about. Who are you doing business with? What is your culture? What are those potential incidents that could create an issue for you as an organization? What are you doing to get ahead of that? And not necessarily advocating some big bureaucratic administrative program, but I do think that there are simple things that organizations can do. And quite frankly, reputational incidents are the ones that actually show up on CNN or any of this. And social media, oh my gosh, that's right. Magnified the issue.
So true.
What about, I really want to get your perspective on what I think is probably the number one risk in terms of oversight today of boards, and that's cyber. And I know you've talked about, but how are boards thinking about it? How are they getting comfortable? How are they getting ahead of it? What have you seen?
Yeah, so boards are definitely focused on this.
Yep.
And I see it handled multiple ways. So I've seen it handled within audit committees, within tech committees. One of the questions people ask often is, well, is it a committee issue? Is a full board responsible? First of all, the board is responsible for everything that happens on the board.
Right.
Does not matter if a committee takes the lead or does not take the lead. You suddenly can't say, oh, well, I wasn't on that committee.
Yeah.
No, that's not the way it works. So when you actually have a committee take charge, it doesn't absolve anybody else. What I've seen done is, especially around cyber, is you have the opportunity to invite the whole board to participate for different events or sessions or what have you. I've also seen more leaning on external.
Bringing subject matter experts in and
absolutely, to come in and or do reviews or what have you, to try to get more understanding and insight in this particular arena. But
is there something more, not necessarily on the board you serve on, but do you think there's something more that as cyber professionals or the CISO or the CIO, something more that they can do to help either educate the board members, to help them understand the risks, because you can't protect yourself from all cyber. You could bankrupt a company doing that. But is there something more you think would be valuable?
I think it's setting expectations. To your point, it's not a matter of if, it's when.
Right.
And then it's just a matter of how large. But understanding that and making sure board members actually understand that.
Right.
Half the battle is understanding what you do when it happens.
Right.
So you can put plans in place for that now. Back to how do you mitigate the risk? How do you get those things in place? You understand, here's what happens, here's what transpires. That's important for the board to understand just as equally.
Absolutely.
In terms of what you have. And then understanding how you compare. And that's where having external folks come in and review and then be able to share, well, here's how you fit on the spectrum so that you understand your risk relative.
Where you stand, where you benchmark against other organizations.
Exactly.
The challenge is it's changing so fast, and there's so many different players in cyber. That's where if I would have empathy for you on a board, it's like, what do I need to know? What's most important? What can we do from a board to make sure that we protect this company? I mean, it's a challenge.
It is, and the best thing you can do is make sure you have the right talent in place in the company.
Absolutely. So going back to all of this, if you were to go back to before you were on your first board, what would you have liked to have known? Is there any guidance you give to new board members to say, if you're starting out on a board, here's the 2 or 3 things that you can do to really become a great board member?
Yeah. So a few things. One is, before joining your board, make sure you just do the diligence on the company so you understand what you're stepping into, because you are taking on fiduciary responsibility.
Absolutely.
So that's one. Then, to be a good board member, it's really do your homework. Walk in trying to understand as much as you can understand. Take advantage of education sessions. Ask for an induction so that you can understand the lingo. Ask for, I always talk about, every company has their own language. We all speak English, but every company has their own language, and they're called acronyms. Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
And so you need the dictionary of, at least, here's the key. I always spend my first board meeting, literally, I just because I don't want to interrupt the flow. I just write down, okay, 7BR, okay, 7BR, whatever happens to be on my list. And then during the breaks, I say, can you help me understand, what these things are? So don't break the flow to ask, but do in terms of find out, and then obviously work with the company, try to use less lingo. But anyway.
Okay. Well, let's move to my favorite part of the conversation, which is just leadership. So you've had, obviously, a long, rich career at IBM, at Blockbuster, at MetricStream. You've been on board. So I'd love to just get perspectives, and you've even already shared some of your leadership perspectives. But one's going to start with an article that you wrote, and this goes back to our early conversation about creating a strong, innovative culture. But you had 2 elements that you say are so very important to creating a strong culture. The first one is to establish a clear vision that inspires and excites. And the second one is calculated risk-taking. So let's start with the first one, which is establishing a clear vision that inspires and excites. How, as a leader, do you convey a message that can resonate with, the masses of people and excite them? That's the thing that I think is the most challenging. What did you do to excite people at MetricStream?
Sure. So at MetricStream, what we were focused on was enabling companies to perform with integrity.
Right.
Right? Perform better
Yep.
in terms of overall growth, et cetera, and preserve and protect their overall business and assets.
Mm-hmm.
So, every day when people at MetricStream and we were working, I said, listen, we're here trying to help companies perform.
Mm-hmm.
And if we do our jobs right, they will actually be significantly more successful. Now, we happen to be doing it with software to help them manage governance, risk, and compliance. But if you do governance, risk, and compliance well, you will be able to help them perform, preserve, protect, right? Their overall business, their assets, their
Right.
integrity, all those elements. So you have to create the vision of how what you're doing is actually helping others.
Right. So it's not about us, it's about them.
Exactly.
Right?
So that you can see what you're doing. Right? There's no better I always use this with the team as well. There's no better compliment than one that comes from a customer on how whatever we've done has helped them improve, get better, grow, whatever it happens to be, right? That is the best compliment.
Would you
that
actually
can
think of
possibly
it
get.
as like almost the organization's deeper why? Meaning like it's very easy to say, oh, well, we sell, technology, but that's not really what we do. Like you said, we enable organizations to thrive, to protect their brand, to do all of these things. Would you actually think about it in the context of like a deeper why?
Sure. You can absolutely think about it that way. Because bottom line is, especially today with millennials.
Yeah, that's where I'm getting at. It's hard to
yeah,
excite people. Yep.
People want to know what's the point.
Right.
What's the point? So you're not going to inspire them by saying, we're going to take a company and grow it from, 7% a year to 25% a year. That's not going to do it.
That's not going to captivate
No,
them.
that's not going
Right.
to captivate. You have to understand, what is the point, right? How are we, as a company, as an organization, helping to make the world better somehow?
Right.
And frankly, I think it's a great point, because if you actually have a business that's not doing that in some way, you're probably in the wrong business.
Right. Right. I honestly think it's an opportunity, and the companies that I gravitate to, even probably from a customer, is when I can understand why they do what they do, and it transcends just making a buck.
Yeah.
What about risk taking? Like that, it sounds great. It's the hardest damn thing in the world when you're working in a big bureaucratic organization, because whether it's real or imagined, people think they just get smacked on the hand if they do something that's breaking the rules. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah. That's the whole calculated risk. It goes back to risk and opportunity. If you don't take risks, you just aren't going to get many opportunities. And that's both personally in terms of
Right.
career. It's true professionally in terms of organizations and or companies. So you have to take risks. The key is taking a calculated risk.
Right.
So that you understand going into it what could potentially happen or not happen. And then have your backup plans, or step 2, or whatever it happens to be when those things do happen. But at the end of the day, companies want calculated risk takers in their organizations.
I think that's an important thing, because I would argue that if you were to ask, just employees in any organization, and they were to say, do you agree or disagree with that comment? I think most would say I disagree. And I think it's important, because you as a CEO are like, the only way we're going to differentiate ourselves, grow, is by having those people in the organization.
It's true.
I know. You know what? There's a guy named Mike Endersky. I don't know if this name means anything. He was the CMO at Burt's Bees, and then he was a president of another Bliss company back in New York. He said one of the things that resonated with me so deeply. I'd love to get your thoughts on this.
Sure.
He said, you need to break rules. But what he said is, I'm not suggesting, especially as a GRC CEO, I'm not suggesting you break laws or regulations, but every organization is built up and they have all of these rules of things that you can and can't do. And I'm not even talking about company policies. I'm just talking maybe norms. And like sometimes you just have to break through to really differentiate yourself in the marketplace. And I was like, oh my gosh, when you actually see some of the greatest innovations, not even necessarily product innovations, but even business innovations, is because somebody said, the norm that is within this organization just doesn't fit. We've got to change that.
It's true.
It's totally, I love that. Yeah. What do you think, maybe this is a hard question. What do you think the biggest risk you've ever taken in your career?
Oh, gosh.
Which one scared the hell out of you when you were doing it? Maybe is a better question.
Yeah. So probably the biggest risk was moving my family to Japan.
How old were your kids when you did that?
Our daughter was middle school and our son was elementary school.
The middle school one must have been, what are you doing to me, Mom?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So here we are. I'm working for IBM at the time and have the opportunity to go to Japan and be a general manager, and all that's great. So Japan. So okay. So imagine this. Matter of fact, I'll tell you a quick story which will then give you the context. The boss that I was leaving to go take this job, he was actually Australian.
Okay.
And therefore had spent a lot of his career at IBM in the Asia Pacific region.
Yep.
So he said, okay, Shellye, how much do you know about Confucius? And I said, Peter, you're trying to tell me something, just tell me.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And he said, all right. He said, in Japan, there's 3 things that are important in business for success.
Yep.
I said, okay. He said, the first is wisdom. Now, at the time, I don't know, I'm like mid-30s, maybe late 30s. I'm right in that age. Anyway, wisdom is gray hair and age.
Right.
I haven't got it.
Yeah.
Okay. Second is being male.
Not male.
Not
right.
male either. I'm sitting here saying, is this my pep talk?
Yeah.
And I'm like, what is the third one? And he says, the third one is intelligence. He says, Shellye, you only have one thing going for you, and you better figure out how to maximize it. That was my go off and be successful speech. So here I am going, okay, fine. So went off to Japan, but it's uprooting the whole family. So it's not just that I then have to figure out how I do this job, but it's also if the family ends up not being happy in Japan, it's not going to go very well for me.
How big of an impact do you think that decision had on your career?
Actually, had a big impact, and I'll explain it. I'll explain that in terms of in a minute. It was absolutely the right thing to do. I didn't hesitate at all.
Oh, really?
No, I really didn't hesitate. Matter of fact, this was a job that I was asking for. It was just when it happened, it was like, oh my God.
Were you asking for it in Japan or just within the
organization?
organization?
This is within the organization. Remember the planning piece I talked about?
Yeah.
Well, it turned out that when I did my research, all of the senior execs in operating roles that reported to the CEO had all done international assignments.
Got it. Yep.
All right. But more than international assignments, the majority had done stints in Japan, which wasn't obvious because it's not the biggest international market, right?
Right.
So I'm like, okay, I don't know why that is, but something's happening here. So I need to go to Japan.
Success leaves clues, right?
That's right.
Yeah,
So I need to figure out how I go to Japan. So that's why I was like, yes. And then when it really happened, I was like, oh my God, what am I thinking? Anyway, so we picked up and we moved to Japan. And, here's my husband, pretty big guy, black guy in Japan, towering over everyone. And he's the trailing spouse, which is also not typical.
Right.
And then, the kids. Anyway, it was just a very interesting experience. It was actually a phenomenal experience for everybody. So it worked out super, super well. But it was definitely a risk.
Yeah. It's funny. It's like when we look at these, I agree that it was a risk. I'll bet you now when you look back upon it, you're like, in the grand scheme of things, was it that? I mean, if it didn't work out, you could have come back. Mm-hmm. And so that's one of the things I always try to look at now. It's looking at these type of decisions over a long period of time, because invariably you're probably going to say, oh, it's the best thing I ever did. And then even if it didn't work out, not that big of a deal.
Exactly. And that's the way you look at it. It's a calculated risk.
So let me go to a quote that you have that I think is fantastic. And this goes back to your whole career plan. But you say you got to proactively manage your career. You can't count on anyone doing it for you. Sometimes you get lucky and someone helps you, but you can't count on that. That is a roll of the dice, and it's much better to make your own luck. How can you make your own luck? Like, what guidance do you have? Especially, I'm always interested in counseling kids that are out of school or kids that are trying to find the purpose in the companies that they're working for. But how do you make your own luck? What do you tell people?
Yeah. So the way I see luck is having the right experience, the right skills, and the right background when an opportunity presents itself. Because opportunities present themselves all the time.
Right.
It's just that we don't have the ability to take advantage of them. So, the best way to focus on making your luck is making sure that you've got the best education, that you have had a set of experiences that will matter in what it is that you're trying to achieve. I gave examples talking through. How many people do you think actually took the time to figure out that the direct reports to the CEO had all done international assignments? And by the way, the majority had gone to Japan?
Not many.
Probably not.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you don't do the research to understand what experience you need for the roles that you want, then you get to the point where you're not actually set up properly when you think you're ready for an opportunity.
Right.
So do the research. I call it doing your homework. We did homework in school. You should continue doing homework your entire life. Doing homework is just getting prepared.
Right.
For the next
So
thing.
it's not even really luck. It's hard. I mean, it
Yeah.
literally is hard work.
Yeah, it's work.
It's where luck meets opportunity.
Yeah, exactly.
But let me go back to, you talked about your deep planning.
Mm-hmm.
How did that factor in? Would you, like, if I were to look at your computer, do you have like documents that say, here's my aspiration, here's the things that I'm going to do? Do you manage it that closely? Like, do you know?
I know what you're saying. So I would set my goalposts. And those, I'd write down
Do you still have them?
and tell people.
Yeah.
And tell people.
Yep.
'Cause
So go dig into that. You will say, like, here's the 5 things that are important to me, even if they're not even things that are kind of near term, because they may be longer term into the future.
Yeah, it's funny. I learned in time about how far ahead to tell people in terms of what I want, but I absolutely believe in telling people. And the reason is, if you don't tell people what you're aspiring to, what you're trying to do, they can't help you.
Right.
They can't help you. And it's always amazing to me. People will say, oh, well, one day I want to do da-da-da. I said, that's great. I said, who else knows this? And they'll be like, well, me? I mean, nobody. I'm like, well, then the universe can't help you if you don't tell the universe what you want.
You just hit it, because the second you start to declare, in my experience, your goals, people actually want to help you.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, wow, I know so-and-so that can help connect you to so-and-so that can, allow you to achieve that.
Exactly right.
That's
Exactly
interesting.
right.
Now, you did talk about that you like to periodically evaluate your life. And I almost get this sense where maybe you go into like a cave. I'm being facetious, but maybe can you talk about that? Like, what does that look like? How often do you do that? How important has that been to your success?
Yeah. It's actually, I think, been pretty important in terms of my success. When I say my success, I'm not talking with just my career
Your
success.
life, right.
My life
Yeah.
success. I mean, I've been really fortunate. I've been, 2018? I've been married for 34 years.
Wow.
And I'd marry my husband all over again. So to have that, and to have the career, and to have a great village, of friends, etc., to me, that is my successful life.
Yeah.
And so when you say how important is it for me to periodically do a checkpoint, okay, how am I doing and where am I standing and the whole bit, it was really important to me because I wanted all of those things as I was coming through.
What does that checkpoint look like? Like, do you block? I mean, I'm once again getting tactical, but I love to hear like, tools or ways people do things. Like, do you actually block a period of time? Do you have a routine that you go through? How do you do it? Or is it that you're always somewhat retrospective and thinking about it?
Yeah, so it's actually both. One,
Okay.
I say always. I mean, it's not like every day.
Yeah.
But it is something that I'm just very conscious of.
Yep.
Mainly because I'm just such a planner.
Right.
That in order to see am I on track, et cetera, you have to constantly ask yourself those questions. But I do periodically when I'm sitting back to, especially when I've hit a milestone, because then, all right, hit a milestone. So what does this mean for the rest of the plan?
Yep.
And are you tracking or are you not tracking? And where are you on or where are you off? I've always thought of my life as a as a three-legged stool.
Okay.
All right. Which is why I said all those things are important to me, because you have work, as a leg, family is a leg, community is a leg. And then on top is, frankly, however you see your spirituality or what have you.
Right.
And as long as two of the legs are strong, you can still balance.
Yep.
All right. And at any given point in time, there's usually one leg that's a little shaky.
Right,
It's just
right.
the way it goes. But if you have more than one that's shaky, you're in a tough spot.
Yeah.
So that's why I always needed three, which is why I always wanted all three of those elements that I just talked about, because those were very consciously part of my three-legged stool. And so if I was feeling stressed more than usual or feeling right, then I'd look to say, okay, so what's off balance here? And when I say that, I'm not talking work-life balance.
I was
I'm
going to ask
because I don't like that term at all. So I just want to make sure.
Right?
Yeah. So I just want to make sure I'm not talking
Yeah.
about. But I just meant balance between that three-legged stool that I was talking about.
Yeah, Shellye, you know what I see a lot of times myself, although I think I've done a lot better, but other, executives or others, is they oftentimes focus their planning and their goals on work. And what I always tell now, people that I mentor is I honestly don't care about your Deloitte goals, for example. I mean, I do.
Yeah.
But what I care about is what are your goals in life? Because the second you begin to strip away your spirituality, your family, your friends, your health, then you're lost. And let's think about how you could put those goals together, because it transcends just, a 1-year performance period. You got to look at it holistically.
Absolutely.
And the second that I find that is that people that begin to look at their life more holistically, they make better decisions. I think they're more thoughtful about their future, and I think they perform better when they think about it holistically. And I think that's
I agree.
love your stool analogy.
Yes.
I love the stool also. I don't know if there's anything to the spirituality being where you sit, but that's actually pretty cool. I like it.
Thanks.
Okay, so let's talk about your disdain for work-life balance, and you call it work-life optimization. But there's so many different perspectives on this. But can you just share, what you think about in terms of work-life optimization? What's the thinking behind that?
Sure. So first of all, the reason I don't like the term work-life balance is because a balance is literally even all the time. If you look at a balance, that's what it is. It's
Right.
even all the time.
You
And I don't
can't
care what you're
achieve
doing.
that,
I don't care what you're doing in life. You can never achieve that. So it sets the wrong expectations. And especially for women, it leads to a lifetime of guilt, which is so hampering to aspirations and success.
You just said something I think is really interesting, is life can never be in balance. And if you're out of balance, that starts to create an equation of feeling guilty. And I
Correct.
agree with that.
Yeah.
And the example I use, actually one of the best people that I work with, she's just about to go out on maternity. And I know that sometimes women struggle when they go out on maternity. They feel guilty about what they're not given at work. And I think that's what you're...
Yeah.
So how do you optimize life then? What are any special techniques?
Yes, for me, it's been all about integrating.
Integrating.
So-
What do you mean by that?
And what I mean by that is I don't wear hats. I don't suddenly put on my work hat and I've got work, and you're seeing Shellye work. And then I
Right.
take off the work hat and I put on the family hat, and now I'm mom. And I take that off, and now I'm at church and I'm doing, I don't swap hats. I am the same person. So therefore, I have tried to actually integrate my life, because my most precious resource is time. And if that's my most precious resource, then I've got to figure out how to best optimize it. So I layer. So for instance, I enjoy cooking.
You have a
I
cooking
enjoy,
club, I think.
do,
read.
right,
Yes,
right.
yeah.
And that's why I started, because
Yeah.
I enjoy cooking. I like to entertain. I enjoy people.
Right.
And friends. And I like wine. So yes, when we moved here to the Bay Area, I started a gourmet dinner club. And that was, put all those 4 things together. It gave me a platform in which to meet people and then to gather and get my social kind of network going, et cetera. So all in one thing. And that's a perfect example for me of integrating, if you will, my life.
My wife and I had a gourmet club when we lived in this previous town we lived in. We're just starting up a new one.
Ah, there you go.
What is your guidance on starting a gourmet club?
Ah, gosh. Well, it depends what you're
What's
trying.
one or two things? Like you just say,
Okay, well, it all depends what you want out of it. And what I mean by that is, for me, it was not let to do those 4 things.
yep.
So I didn't even care if people were good cooks.
Interesting.
All I cared about, my question was, do you like to cook?
So you would
Right.
rotate to different people's houses. Is that the
So
way that
we
it would
rotate to people, but everybody cooks every time.
Okay. Oh, okay. So
Because
you
ours
bring
is big.
something. Yep.
Yes, everybody
Yep.
brings, but they bring the recipe they get assigned.
Okay.
And they have to follow the recipe. And yes, and then they have to be on time because there's a schedule to how the dinners work
Right.
and everything else. And so if you're out of time, it'll mess things up. So there's some rules because it's a hobby and not a job.
Right.
So it makes it a little bit easier for me. But I like creating recipes and I like the entertaining. So I do all the recipes. So that's part of it. Everybody
That's part
gets,
of what
here's
you
the
do.
menu. Yeah, everybody gets the menu. Here's the menu. Here's what you do at home. Here's what you do at the host house and all that good stuff. So it's all very structured.
I like where you were going though with this whole notion of kind of, I think the word you used was layering. And I think sometimes we do try to create these separate lives, which I think complicates things. And what I found, especially, with work and, my duties around the home is if it's a Monday and today's a Tuesday, it's my daughter's birthday. I'm going to get home early and we're going to do something nice for
Yeah.
her. And I'm okay with that. And likewise, if I'm on a trip and I have to take a couple calls, I just don't worry about it. Whereas maybe in the past, it would drive me nuts. It's like you're infringing on my time with my family. And so I think it's just maybe getting comfortable with layering. I love that.
Yes, I just think it's the only way that it works because frankly, this notion of trying to be balanced or trying whatever is a recent phenomenon. I mean, prior to the 1900s, right? We're now in 1900s. It wasn't a choice. People worked all the time.
Right.
They were not limited on hours. You worked typically 6, if not 7 days a week.
Right.
You did that. I mean, it's the whole notion of, work-life balance or family time. You didn't have a choice. You only had what you had because of how things. It's only a recent phenomenon in the evolution of people.
Right.
So it's one that we are just self-imposing. People
Absolutely.
lived for thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of years.
Right.
With having
Operating this way. Yep.
having no option.
Yep.
So anyway, so therefore, it's like, listen, let's just integrate our lives. Let's get rid of the guilt, and just do the best that we can with what we've got. That's all. So anyway.
So the name of this podcast is Resilient.
Yes.
When you think of resilience, and I would say you are absolutely a resilient woman, but what would be some of the key characteristics, like attributes of a resilient leader or a resilient person? It doesn't even matter if it's a leader.
Yeah. To me, examples of being resilient are those people who can take a punch, and I don't mean physically, but have things happen, not expected, unwarranted, unfair, whatever terms you want to put on it, and are able to deal with it and continue to rise. It's all about understanding that you are responsible for you. External things that happen that seem to be setbacks or seem to be, whatever, can be overcome.
You know what? You use the word unfair, and then you also use the statement, almost you need to take 100% responsibility for your life. That's not what you said, but I think that's what you inferred. And I think that's maybe a really important point that you're drawing out here is you need to get over yourself and the world, and everybody's going to get knocked on their butt. It's the ones maybe that don't get focused on the external and don't worry about things that are out of their control or point fingers are the ones that truly are resilient. I don't know, is that kind of what you're...
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, growing up, the term my mother probably used more than any other term was life isn't fair. You complained that life isn't fair.
Too bad. Yeah, exactly.
So what?
Yeah.
I mean, it was like you couldn't, there was just nothing. Life isn't fair. Okay, so now what are you going to do? So that, yes, it is. It's all about understanding. You control what you control.
Is there anybody that exemplifies those attributes in your mind? I know it's always hard to go to one person, but is there...
Resilience. It's funny. I know you probably want me to name like somebody famous that people could identify
Actually,
with.
I don't.
Okay,
I prefer,
good, because that's
no.
not because when I think of resilience, I have a grandmother who just passed away in April of this year at the age of 105.
Wow.
Yeah.
That must make you happy. You're
Oh,
like, I've
yeah.
got a ways to go.
I know, exactly. I've got some good genes.
Yeah.
Pros and cons to that, though. I'm going to be working forever. But she was probably one of the most resilient people I know.
Why?
Couple things. So she didn't have, she didn't have a 4-year college degree or anything.
Right.
She got married, had 3 children, and all she wanted in life, she used to describe herself as an orphan. Her mom died when she was like a toddler, and their father went off, and she was raised by elderly aunts. So all she wanted in life was a family. Got married, had 3 kids, and then her husband took his own life, left her with 3 kids. My father, I think at the time, was maybe junior high school. He's the eldest. She doesn't have the education to get a job to be able to pay. There's no insurance. They've got this little house, a mortgage, all these things that she's suddenly responsible for and doesn't have that platform. And so she managed, to basically talk her way into getting a bookkeeping job because she's always good at math, spent the weekend in the library, applied for this job, and literally just got this job as a bookkeeper. But what she did was all along the way, as soon as her kids started getting close to college age, then she got a job at Howard University because then you get tuition paid for, right? And then she, as a single mom, raised 3 kids, got them all educated and independent. And she was just amazing and was probably one of the smartest people, totally self-taught, read voraciously, did the crossword puzzle every day. But I've always thought Gran was pretty amazing.
That when you talk about the attributes of resilience, your grandmother is it.
Yeah.
So since you're such a big planner, this is the last question. What's on your plan? What's next?
So right now it's executing phase 2 for me.
Phase 2?
Phase 2.
Wow, that's
yes.
What's phase 2?
So phase 2 is I've handed over the everyday, always on, 24/7 accessible operating job.
Yep.
To one that is really a portfolio. So yes, it's serving on boards. It's advising some companies. It's doing some investing. It's doing writing because I enjoy, in terms of doing that, doing some speaking, and have time for some passion projects that will make hopefully a difference. So that's what I am doing in terms of keeping myself both engaged, still challenged, and still involved, and yet have a lot of flexibility to spend time with my husband, who is not in good health.
Yeah, that's what I understand.
Yeah.
Well, good. Well, Shellye, thank you so much. This was awesome.
Thank
Great
you.
interview. Thank you.
Absolutely. I enjoyed it.
Thanks. Wow, that was incredible. Shellye, thank you very much for the gift of time. That sure was a marathon session, so thank you. There are so many things, though, that you taught us. You taught us how you can leverage crisis for good, growing your revenue 50% because you became, in your words, hyper-focused. That is awesome. Or how to be an effective board leader by going on learning journeys and really going deep on topics. Or who will ever forget not work-life balance, but life optimization. Certainly something I'm going to focus on. I also want to thank everybody who listens to Resilient. I'll tell you, if you weren't out there, we wouldn't produce it. And I get so much great feedback on a weekly basis about lessons that you've learned through social media, emails, and many different places. Resilient is a Deloitte podcast produced by our friends at Rivet Radio. You can find us by visiting Deloitte.com or going to your favorite podcatcher. That's iTunes, SoundCloud, Google Play, Spotify, and just put the keyword Resilient in. I'd encourage you to check out previous episodes. We have great interviews with CEOs, board members, and other leaders. And if you like today's conversation, go back and listen to my interview with Mandeep Grewal. Mandeep has a great story of overcoming the odds and becoming a very successful woman minority executive at United. And if you're enjoying these conversations, share them with your colleagues, friends, and family. I always laugh that folks that are out of the business world actually get as much value as folks that are in the business world. A lot of times people reaching out, and it's the stories around leadership, work-life balance, things like that they really benefit from. And if you are really enjoying Resilient, go to one one of your favorite podcatchers and give it a rating. I can't tell you how important ratings are in driving people to the Resilient Podcast. Also, hit me up on LinkedIn or Twitter with any comments or recommendations that you have for future guests. I get a lot of great recommendations. Just got one earlier this week that we're looking into. And if you're trying to find me, my profile is under Michael Kearney, last name spelled Kearney on LinkedIn, or you can go to Twitter, mkearney33. Take care and have a wonderful day.